we're breaking down 5 of the most common myths about America, the kind almost everyone believes before they've actually been there. Some of these turn out to be true, just blown way out of proportion by movies. Some are completely false, kept alive purely because they look good on screen. And one of them actually works the exact opposite of what you'd expect. It surprises even people who visited the US multiple times. Stick around until the end, because that last one flips the whole picture. Myth number 1, everyone in America carries a gun. This is probably the most exaggerated image out there. Every other American walking around with a pistol on their hip like it's the Wild West. The reality depends heavily on the state. The right to bear arms is constitutionally protected, but the rules around storing, buying, and carrying, open or concealed, vary from state to state more than laws differ between separate European countries. In Texas or Arizona, open carry is genuinely common. In New York or California, getting a concealed carry permit is a long, bureaucratic process that's honestly comparable to what you deal with in parts of Europe. Gun ownership rates are real and high. Estimates put a gun in roughly a third of American households. But most of those owners aren't people walking around town with a holster. It's a firearm sitting in a safe at home, sometimes untouched for years. A tourist walking through downtown New York or San Francisco is far more likely to go their entire trip without seeing an openly carried weapon than to actually encounter one on the street. Myth number 2. American food is just fast food. The stereotype is easy to picture. Burgers, gallons of soda, everything fried. And there's real truth buried in there. Portion sizes in the US are genuinely, visibly bigger than in Europe. That part isn't a myth. It's an actual cultural difference in how food is served. But concluding that the entire country eats nothing but fast food is a big oversimplification. Over the last 10 to 15 years, major American cities have shifted noticeably toward organic food, farmers markets, and mindful eating, in some cases even more visibly than certain European countries. Chains like Whole Foods, along with local farmers markets, exist in nearly every major city, with prices that match premium European grocery stores. At the same time, rural America and smaller towns really do lean more heavily on chain fast food. But that's mostly a matter of infrastructure and population density, not some national character trait. Myth number 3. There's zero social support in America. Everything costs money. Fully privatized healthcare, no benefits, everyone fending for themselves. This myth is partly true, but the details matter a lot here. Healthcare in the US really is structured fundamentally differently from most of Europe. That's not an exaggeration, it's a real structural feature, with most of the burden falling on private insurance tied to your employer. But saying there's no social support at all isn't accurate either. The country does have programs like Medicaid and Medicare for specific groups, food assistance, SNAP, and unemployment benefits that in some states are actually fairly generous. The real difference from Europe isn't whether a system exists, it's how fragmented it is. What gets covered automatically in one country requires a separate application, income verification, and depends heavily on which state you live in the other. That fragmentation is exactly what creates the impression of no system at all for people judging by a single personal story. Myth number 4. Americans are shallow because they're too friendly. This is probably one of the most talked about cultural myths, that famous American smile and "how are you?" which a lot of travelers read as insincere. The logic usually goes, if someone smiles and asks how you're doing as a total stranger, then never speaks to you again, the friendliness must not have been real. But this mixes up two different things: everyday politeness and the process of building deeper relationships. Casual friendliness in America really does function as a social norm baked into everyday interaction. It's not a promise to become your friend. Think of it more as social lubrication than a commitment to a relationship. Meanwhile, where actual friendships or neighborly relationships do form, like the random invitations to a backyard barbecue or strangers going out of their way to help, they can be every bit as genuine as anywhere else. The confusion mostly comes from people whose home culture treats everyday politeness as more reserved by default. So any friendliness automatically reads as a signal of closeness. Myth number 5. It's impossible to get around America without a car. Here's the myth that actually flips on its head once you dig into it, and it surprises even people who've already been to the US. Yes, for the vast majority of suburbs and smaller towns, this is completely true. The infrastructure is physically built around the car, sidewalks might not even exist, and the nearest store could be a 20-minute drive away. But in a number of major cities, the situation is the exact opposite. New York is one of the few cities in the world where owning a car creates more problems than it solves. Parking is expensive, and the subway runs 24 hours a day. Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, and Washington all have public transit developed enough to live comfortably without a car. That produces an interesting paradox. A country with a global reputation as car civilization is actually made up of two completely different Americas: a dense, walkable, urban one, and a fully car-dependent, suburban one. And which one a tourist sees first completely determines which myth they end up believing. And that's all 5 myths. Some turned out to be half true, one flipped completely upside down. Which of these surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, and if you want the reverse version, myths about European countries through American eyes, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss it.